in just a couple of minutes. Uh, if you're so daring, we're always curious where people are joining from. So feel free to use the chat to just share where you are currently zooming in from geographically. And I'll add myself to the list here. All right, thank you, Larry, for getting us started. Although we have a Chicago concentration. There we go. We're at least getting around Chicagoland now. So we're building outward. Wonderful. Now we have someone Blossom to be jealous of, although I've heard that this may be one of the few times in January where Chicago may actually be the preferable weather to what's happening in the Bay Area. So we will count this as a very rare moment in human history, at least to date. Who knows what it looks like going forward. All right, well, my clock says 6:01, so we are going to formally get started. Thank you all for joining us for this residential seminar information session on our upcoming opportunity on digital ethics. We have an exciting agenda ahead. After a brief welcome from me, we are going to hear from Tim Murphy, who is the director of the MLA, about this program opportunity. This is a rare chance for lifelong learners to join an MLA level class and to be part of the university for an immersive 6 days. And so Tim will tell you more about the program. Then you'll hear from Callie about the accommodation, application, and pricing. And most importantly, and the reason you are all likely interested, you will hear from Daniel Morner, who is an outstanding assistant professor of philosophy, who is able to combine a looking at classical philosophy with the very modern issues that we face in the digital world. And I know I am fascinated by that intersection and jealous of the students who get to spend 6 days in this investigation. So let me just welcome you first to the Graham School. We are a very special part of a very special university. For those of you who are not familiar with us, we are a founding division of this university because when William Rainey Harper was setting up the university, he had a vision of revolutionizing university study. And the core of that vision was bringing the ideas of this great institution to all learners at all ages and stages of life. And the way he envisioned doing that was through an extension, the first extension of its type in the United States that would build on the extensions that were just being built at Oxford and Cambridge. And I say that in part because Daniel studied at Cambridge, so knows that institution well. So for more than 130 years now, the Graham School has been trailblazing new paths in lifelong learning. And I'll just share that while you're going to hear today about a specific program, all of what we do tries to rigorously explore the big ideas that challenge and change the world through programs and classes in the liberal arts. So how do we take philosophy and all of these other humanistic core elements and investigate the world not only from a timeless, but also a very timely sense? How do we apply this knowledge to our world today? We have 4 different program areas in which we do this. You're going to hear about a residential seminar that emerges from the Master of Liberal Arts, but we also have a basic program where you can study great texts in a great environment. We have open enrollment where you can look across all the disciplines at the university. And then there's travel study, allowing you to actually go to that country I named earlier, among others, study at Oxford, look at art in London, travel to Greece. And so those are the different types of opportunities at Graham. And if this ultimately, or even if this is a fit and you decide to pursue it, know that there are many other opportunities for ambitious lifelong learning at the school. The final thing I'll say is just that the reason this school is so special is because it is a gateway to a place where big ideas are born that challenge and change the world. And we're very proud in 130 years to have 97 Nobel Prizes. But what we're more proud of is the environment that creates that Nobel heavy opportunity, that we are truly a place where we're constantly challenging assumptions, where we're constantly asking one another to go deeper, and where we are bringing unconventional views in the spirit of deep inquiry. And so with that, let me turn it over to a role model of this type of person, Tim Murphy, who's also a double grad of the university and the director of our MLA program. Tim.
Thank you, Seth. I'm pulling up some slides of my own here, and I think we're ready to go. So this residential seminar course that brought you all here this evening, being run this spring, April 30th to May 5th, is being run out of our Master of Liberal Arts program. Now, to be sure, you don't need to be an MLA student to participate in the digital ethics course. We're also opening up to other adult learners to participate on a non-credit basis. But all the same, I thought it would be useful here to say a quick word about the Master of Liberal Arts program to help orient where this class is coming from. So I can explain the MLA by telling you about our excellent faculty who teach in the program, or by telling you all about the fascinating and professionally accomplished students that are pursuing the MLA, who, by the way, are coming to us from all over the country and increasingly now all over the world. But given that this is UChicago and the classroom is central to the experience, I'm just going to use this one slide here to explain the MLA by talking quickly about our curriculum. You can see on this curriculum map of the 9 classes that constitute the degree that the MLA program is an interdisciplinary program. Our students take classes in subjects all throughout the university, in the humanities, social sciences, biological sciences, and physical sciences. And the goal here is to equip our students with a broad foundation and to expose them to the different forms of scholarly inquiry that underpin each of these different subject matters. In other words, to gain understanding and fluency across these different disciplines. So the world is an increasingly complicated place, but if we do our job right and our professors do our job right, the world becomes slightly less complicated for our students because they're able to analyze any given problem through the lens of a biologist or a philosopher or a sociologist. Plenty more to say about this excellent program, of course, and if you're interested in learning more about the MLA, I'd encourage you to attend one of our upcoming information sessions. We'll be sure to include some information about those upcoming information sessions in a follow-up email that we will send to all the registrants tomorrow. But this digital ethics course that the MLA is running this spring is the 3rd iteration of this residential seminar format. The impetus behind the residential seminar came about around this time last year, actually. As a result of the pandemic, the Graham School had students that were taking classes with us from all over the world remotely. And around this time last year, as the world was beginning to open back up, we asked ourselves how we could better engage with more of our students. And in particular, as many of you already know, and as Seth indicated in his opening remarks, the Graham School leads travel study programs. Every year we go to Oxford, and in the past we've organized trips to Greece and to the Holy Land, among other places. So these travel programs have been wildly popular, and we thought that for our students who are outside of Chicago, our beautiful Hyde Park campus could be a travel study destination in and of itself. And so that's how this residential seminar format came to be. Last May, we had about 15 students participate in our inaugural residential seminar for a class called Humanistic Inquiry. They were on campus with us for a full week, in class every day, studying philosophy, literature, and film. And then we repeated that experience in September, inviting a new cohort of students to join us for an intensive week on campus in a class called Foundations of Ethical Thought. On the screen here is a quote from a student in our first residential seminar. And if I'm not mistaken, I think this student is a law professor from Massachusetts. They were not an MLA student, like many of you here tonight, and they participated in the residential seminar on a non-credit basis. And we'll go ahead and just read it. I want you to know that this experience changed me. I'll never be the same again. I am expanded. I'm more knowledgeable. I'm more open. I have been exposed to more possibilities, and I believe in more possibilities. Indeed, and the punctuation really emphasizes the point here, I will never be the same again. Thank you so very much. And this testimonial, I think, was from our September Foundations of Ethical Thought course. The quote is from a student who is in the MLA. I believe they're in California. So this student had been taking classes with us via Zoom for a few quarters and then jumped at the opportunity to join us for a week of in-person intensive classes in Hyde Park. Student says they've taken classes from some finest universities in the nation. Don't recall feeling as stimulated at those other universities as they did it with their week with us. The program made them more hungry for more knowledge, to look more closely at content that they already felt reasonably comfortable. Never expected that to happen. Never thought that they'd be inspired to learn even more. So in a nutshell, that's sort of the structure of the residential seminar format. You can take it for credit through the Master of Liberal Arts program, but as I said, it's also open as a non-credit experience. We'll invite you to campus for a week. You'll be taking classes in some of the beautiful old buildings that we have here on campus. You'll be, emphasis on taking classes. You're going to be in class for 3 hours in the morning and 3 hours in the afternoon, engaged in lively discussion. For this particular one in this upcoming spring on digital ethics. And we'll hear more about that from the professor in just a moment. With that, I'll turn things over to my colleague, Callie, who's going to talk a little bit about the logistics of participating before we hear from the professor.
Yeah, so just to cover some logistics for the program, first I want to talk about accommodations. Students will arrange their own accommodations for the program, which means that if you're in the Chicago area, in the Chicagoland area, you are free to commute daily into campus for those class discussions. But if you wanted to stay closer to campus or are visiting Chicago, there are two hotels that we definitely recommend. There's the Study, which is the campus hotel, and it's academia inspired, again, right there on campus. And then alternatively, there's a beautiful boutique hotel called the Sophie, which is adjacent to campus on 53rd Street. And that's a great option. Again, you can book any hotel, Airbnb, figure out your own accommodations. The only thing we definitely recommend is booking early, just to make sure that availability is there, since we already have our dates for the program. In terms of the application and the pricing for the program, there are two ways that we offer this program. So we offer it for credit within our MLA courses, and then we offer it as a non-credit experience for those outside of the MLA. To go over the logistics of what the non-credit looks like, the pricing for the non-credit course is $2,995, and you won't complete written assessments or receive credit for the course, so you won't get a grade. But again, you'll still have that full course experience. And there's an application for the non-credit students, and it's due on Friday, March 24th. And we are going to do that application rolling admissions. So you're encouraged to apply early. The earlier you apply, the earlier we can get back to you and you can secure your spot in the program. As well as if you're accepted to the program, there's a $500 deposit that we request within 1 week of your acceptance, just to, again, hold that spot. And then the full tuition is due April 10th. And then for students who are going to take it for credit within the MLA, we process those enrollments like we process the enrollments for spring quarter. So all you have to do is email me and Tim and just let us know that you want to be enrolled for spring quarter, and the cost is the same as other spring quarter classes. So it's $38.50. And also, if you're interested in joining the MLA and taking this course for credit within the MLA, we also do spring quarter MLA admissions. So we're going to include all of that information in a follow-up email. And we really encourage you to check out our program and email us. We are resources and would love to hear from you. So that is what the application and pricing looks like for the program. And now for the fun part and the exciting part, we're going to turn it over to our amazing course professor, Daniel Warner, who's an assistant professor in philosophy at IU Chicago, and he is going to tell us a little bit more about the course itself. So Daniel, take it away.
Thank you so much, everyone. I'm going to introduce myself so you can see me, and then I'm going to share a few slides in a little bit to share some more information about the information on the course. So first of all, I want to say it's great to see so many people here. I've taught different courses on digital ethics several times, and it's honestly my favorite course to teach because it's so fresh and new. In so many classes, you sometimes feel like you're catching up to what other people have already said. With digital ethics, it feels like we can actually do something together in the classroom. So my name is Daniel Murner. I've been a professor here at the University of Chicago for 4 years. And before that, I did my graduate work, first at the University of Cambridge and then at Yale University. My main research, if you're interested, is actually in the history of philosophy, particularly the 17th century. I've done a lot of work on why the Dutch philosopher Benedict Spinoza believes there's only one thing in the universe. But complementary to this, I've also been thinking a lot about digital ethics, and I've taught it several times at both Yale and at U Chicago. And I want to emphasize that it's also a real research interest of mine. I have 2 projects that I'm working on right now that are on the intersection of digital piracy and intellectual property, which is one of the topics that we're going to discuss in the class. So let me begin then by saying a little bit about what digital ethics is, because it's a very new field. It's a subset of philosophy of technology, broadly speaking. And I see digital ethics as trying to answer 2 questions. The first question is, how should we live in a world in which technology is ubiquitous? How does it transform our everyday life? And the second question is that new developments in technology make new ethical dilemmas salient. And digital ethics tries to give us the resources to answer this. As I've said, it's a very young field. There's no textbook or even canonical list of papers that I could assign us that would give you a sense of what we're going to study in this class. Instead, we're going to be working together to look at real-world case studies that have not always been discussed by philosophers, bringing them together with texts from philosophy and trying to sort of create the field in a microcosm as we go. So I'm now going to share my screen and share some slides to give you some more information about the details of the course. Okay, great. So these slides, there's only a few of them, but they are available on my website, murner.com/digital-ethics-info.pdf, if you want to save them or reference them later. Let me begin by saying a little bit about the course design. As I mentioned, we're going to investigate specific topics in technology with the help of resources from ethics and philosophy. And I mean that in a broad sense. And the course itself is going to be focused on you with student-driven discussions built around the case studies that we're discussing in each meeting. And I'll distribute a reading list in advance of the course so you can prepare in advance to know what we're going to be covering. What I want to do now is dive in briefly to one of the case studies and topics we're going to focus on, general AI, and say a little bit about the questions that I find interesting in it. Then I'm going to say something about the philosophy and the kinds of philosophical resources that we're going to learn about. And then I'll conclude by giving you a sense of some of the other topics that I expect us to cover in the course. So let's begin with general AI. As you probably know, I think this is a particularly exciting topic recently because of the release of ChatGPT's chatbot, which has an amazing ability to reproduce human conversations, seemingly human conversations in response to various queries. And often when I teach this class, we spend multiple sessions on AI because there's just so much for us to discuss. And I want to focus on 3 questions that I think are interesting about AI that we can try to build off of. The first question we try to ask is almost a preliminary question. What is artificial intelligence? What is consciousness? Some of you might be familiar with the Turing test, Alan Turing's famous idea that you can determine whether or not a thinking machine is thinking based upon whether or not it can mimic human behavior in a conversation. What I think is less well known is that Turing initially thought of this not as a necessary and sufficient condition for thinking. It's not a necessary and sufficient condition for thinking that you can have a conversation. Instead, what Turing suggested is that if we see machines talking with us, we'll change our own concepts of what thinking is and what consciousness is. And this completely transforms what it is to investigate the question, what is AI and what is consciousness? And so we'll try to grapple with these problems as we think about what AI is. Now, a very interesting and second question that's recently been discussed is the question of whether or not AI have rights. And so we can imagine questions about what grounds the moral status of human beings and whether or not that should be extended to AI. Should, for example, the fact that AI are dependent upon us, perhaps in a unique way, mean that they have less claim on us than others? Or on the other hand, are AI what's sometimes called rights monsters? That is, beings that have so much of a claim on us that they actually outweigh humans. And this brings us to the final topic about AI that I think is fascinating, which is the question of existential risk. So existential risk is having a huge heyday in philosophy right now. It's the idea that there might be certain risks of extinction or the threats to the existence of human beings And the suggestion is that these risks are so high in potential value. For example, there are some people who estimate that there are 10 to the 78th future human lives, which we could lose if humans went extinct. Some people think that these risks are so high that even though the probabilities are very low, we need to make existential risk be our first priority in ethics. And so we're going to try to explore the question whether or not AI poses an existential risk and how we should reason about existential risks when there's such tremendous deep-seated uncertainty about them. Now, these are just some examples of questions that we might raise about a specific topic. And I want to emphasize that the way I approach this is not to just give you a topic and say, go. But what I really want to do is try to provide the philosophical foundation for a sophisticated and engaged discussion about these topics. So if I turn to the next slide, I'm going to give you a sense of some of the philosophical resources that we're going to draw on and develop in this class. I should say I would never use a slide like this in teaching. It's too busy, but it has a psychological purpose here to show you just the diversity of the material that we're going to try to cover. So just to go through some of this quickly, ethical theory concerns the question, what should we do? And historically, there's been two dominant approaches to ethical theories: consequentialists, who argue that action should only be evaluated by their consequences, and deontologists, who are non-consequentialists, who say there are morally relevant features of actions other than their consequences. For example, many appeal to the relevant intentions of agents when they act. Obviously, if you think about something like AI, there's an entire question whether or not AI has intentions. And so there's a question how you can even think about applying a non-consequentialist theory to the actions of an AI. Complementary to these are theories of rights. In my opinion, rights can be given a foundation. It's either consequentialist or non-consequentialist. And so the questions of rights can sometimes transcend the more specific questions as to which ethical theory you adopt. But throughout this course, we'll be discussing questions about the rights to privacy, property, person, etc. In fact, although it doesn't emerge so clearly in the AI case, although there are interesting questions about how to think about the ways that they train AI on different kinds of data sets, privacy is one of the main themes of the course, and we'll be touching on privacy again and again throughout different case studies that we discuss. In addition to these sort of very specific questions about what one should do in a specific case, we're going to draw on resources from normative ethics as well. Questions about how do you ground moral status for a being, like a human being, or a human being who's undergone various enhancements, or a machine. And we're going to talk about how different kinds of value or different kinds of goodness can help us weigh different considerations against each other. For example, if the source of something's goodness is intrinsic or extrinsic, or if the thing is a final good, that is something that's good for its own sake, or if it's only good for the sake of something else. And finally, just to conclude this, we'll be looking beyond ethics. Philosophy is a very unified discipline. It would be impossible for us to only study ethical questions. And so we're going to have to build up from questions in metaphysics, which is the study of what exists, and epistemology, which is the study of knowledge. And so we'll investigate questions like, what is a human being? What is thinking? And also these questions about human reasoning. How should you reason under conditions of uncertainty? And so these are philosophical resources we draw on. How are these going to be integrated into the class? Well, it's going to vary a lot, and it's going to be shaped by your interests as well. But we're going to be looking at some foundational papers in ethical theory which touch on these questions. There'll be handouts, there'll be mini lectures, and some I'm sure will emerge organically as we go. So with that all set, I want to now conclude by running through some of the main topics I expect us to discuss more briefly than I discussed the case of general AI. The first is the right to be forgotten. So this is a very interesting principle, which is codified in various places in Europe under the GDPR, in South Korea, in Argentina, which suggests that individuals should have the right to remove personal information about themselves from Google. So you can submit to Google a request to have information about you removed. People have used this for all kinds of reasons. For example, doctors have used this to remove negative patient reviews. And people have used this to remove vivid and bloody photos of people, of family members who suffered from injuries. And so it has a huge range of uses. And part of what I find so fascinating about the right to be forgotten is that I think it illustrates a very common phenomenon in digital ethics, which is that the right to be forgotten is not about removing content. It's about making it harder to find content. No one says, according to these laws, that we can get rid of all information on the internet. It's just that you can't easily search for it anymore on Google. And this notion that the ease of use of something might be ethically relevant, that's just not a question that people normally ask in ethics. In ethics, people are normally thumbs up, thumbs down, do it, don't do it. The notion that it might make a difference how easy it is really understudied and is really an opportunity to bring out something interesting about the digital side of ethics. And the same phenomenon occurs in lots of other cases, like in social media, where there's just suddenly this, everyone previously could make comments, but now there's this ease of dissemination. And how does that ease contribute to the ethical questions? Sorry, I got carried away, but I find this to be a very interesting topic. So it's just to briefly run through some other topics. Cryptocurrency. Every time I teach versions of this class, it seems like there was just a bubble in cryptocurrency that collapsed, and this time is no different. But nonetheless, I think the questions are fascinating. It intersects with questions of privacy, of course, and how people choose to use their money. It intersects with metaphysical questions about the nature of value and the nature of exchange between people. As I mentioned, the third topic, digital piracy, this is a personal research interest of mine. I think it's very interesting because, especially now that they've legalized jaywalking in California, I believe, digital piracy is probably the single most common instance of law breaking that many people engage in, other than maybe speeding. And so it's a good example of how to think about ethics from the perspective of so-called non-ideal theory, thinking about ethics from this perspective of assuming that and knowing that you're not in the ideal world. Another topic that we'll discuss is human enhancement. There's a huge range of ways that people approach this. We'll see Andy Clark arguing that humans have always been enhanced because they've always used tools, and the iPhone is no different from that. And we'll see people discussing what it would be like to have human enhancements that, for example, might let us sleep, might make us need less sleep, and how that might trade off with spending more time at work, more time in leisure, more time studying, etc. Fifth topic, virtual reality. The darling of science fiction, and now it is reality with the metaverse and things like that. And so we'll be approaching this from a couple of perspectives. We'll explore a very interesting argument by David Chalmers. Chalmers suggests that if you were to wake up one day and learn that you live in the matrix, that you live in a virtual reality, that would be no different from learning that string theory is true. So what he means by that is that we should think about the matrix as just a scientific hypothesis about the ultimate structure of reality. The matrix is not for him a skeptical scenario, for example. We'll also discuss the ethical side of this. Many people shy away from virtual reality because they are worried that because they believe there's some value to doing things in the real world, value that isn't expressed when you do things virtually or in a game or something like that. Unfortunately, it's very difficult to pin down what exactly is important about doing things. Most people in this discipline, I like to say, argue by italics. They just put do in italics and don't explain what they mean. And so we'll be trying to explore what it is to do something and why it's so valuable. And finally, we'll be looking at social media. Social media, I think, is on many of our minds, both as a sort of democratizing and liberating opportunity for people to share their views with each other and build solidarity, but also as a sort of troubling example of some of the group dynamics that many of us worry about. And so we'll explore social media, we'll explore the role of algorithms on social media, and then finally, as I mentioned, conclude with general AI. All right, I'm going to stop sharing my screen for now because that's the sort of summary of the major topics in digital ethics. And then I think I'm happy to take any questions that anyone might have. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. That was excellent. So we're here now at the Q&A portion of the evening. If you want to just unmute yourself and shout questions out, feel free to do so. Otherwise, put them in the chat. And they could be questions directed to Daniel for content, of course, or if there's sort of general questions about the program, Callie or myself could address them. So please don't be shy.
Daniel, my name is Ed Gramling, and I am a lawyer in New York City, and I work for a pharmaceutical company, and this program kind of caught my eye. And so between me and you and the rest of this group, I'm trying to be able to articulate a reason why a pharmaceutical company might send a representative there to take this class. And just to give a little background, I deal in a lot of digital information, obviously. We are sort of working in the AI space now on a regular basis. And I guess, I mean, my request is that you might give me a couple of bullet points to convince my management that this is a something that we could both study and use practically in kind of the real world of pharmaceuticals. So I appreciate any insight you have there to help me convince them to see you soon.
Yeah, thank you, Ed. That's a great question. So, although the course is organized around specific topics, the function of those topics is really a means to an end, to get us to thinking about more fundamental philosophical concepts that we can then each deploy in our own area. And so, in fact, for people who are taking the course for credit, there's a paper at the end, and I'm definitely going to be inviting you to write on an area that you have some expertise in. Where you can develop some of the philosophical concepts that we've deployed to perhaps a new thing that's more relevant to the way that you've approached things. I mean, just thinking about the case of pharmaceuticals, I see many points of contact between that and the course. Just to mention a few, first of all, obviously there's serious considerations of privacy with any sort of research program that's interested in pharmaceuticals, and we'll be discussing privacy throughout the course, including reading the most and best paper, arguably, in recent history of philosophy on privacy by Judith Jarvis Thompson, which extends far beyond just the case of the right to be forgotten, for example. So that's one point of contact. The second point of contact is I don't necessarily expect that this will be part of this version of the course, but I'll be honest, last time I taught this, when we had our unit on intellectual property, our focus was on pharmaceutical patents and how to think about the different values of intellectual property in relation to pharmaceutical patents, vaccinations, particularly looking at COVID vaccinations, and thinking about loosening restraints there. And so there was a definite point of contact there, and I expect that those themes will emerge. And a third thing is I decided actually not to put it on the slide, but one of the main themes that we'll be discussing throughout this class is the use of algorithms and possible bias in algorithms. And given the way that you might be using data, I think taking seriously the possibility of algorithmic bias, thinking about how we should, for example, reason about different kinds of biases that we know we encounter, and then what should we do with that knowledge? How can we accommodate it? That all seems to me like perhaps it could be helpful to you in your career.
And then, Daniel, I don't know if you have the chat open, but Jerry got things started with a question that's clearly directed toward you.
Yeah, this is a great question. So I take it the question is something like, it's one thing to make a judgment that says this is good. It's a further claim to say that we are motivated to act well. And it's a still further and yet stronger claim to say that we're obligated to act in accordance with what's good. And I think it's definitely true to say that people struggle with explaining this binding normativity, the obligations that are at the basis of ethics. Now, there's a lot of approaches to thinking about how we can get that kind of normativity into the picture. One picture is the one that you mentioned, that the normativity arises from aesthetics, which we could understand here perhaps as our consciousness of what makes action good in an aesthetic sense. That's one possible approach. Another possible approach is to think about reason, to think that the bindingness of moral judgments stems from the constraints on practical reasoning that we all have as rational agents. Now, I'll be honest, these are questions in what's generally called metaethics. And the standard view about the relationship between ethical theory and metaethics is that metaethics does not determine the content of a particular ethical theory. Rather, metaethics is an independent question about why the ethical theory that turns out to be true is in fact binding on us. And so since this class is going to focus more on ethical theory and its applications in normative ethics, I don't expect that we're going to be discussing as much these explicit questions about the nature of obligation that might be, that are more properly within the domain of metaethics.
And Larry, I see your hands up and you've unmuted yourself, so please feel free to ask your question.
Yeah, thank you. I wanted to follow up on Ed's question.
Mm-hmm.
For those of us who maybe are actually practitioners in this field in terms of addressing the policy implications of a lot of these, I was interested in this class in the sense that this might arm me with better tools to allow for better decision-making in the policy arena. Do you see that as an outcome of the class, as opposed to perhaps using lots of really interesting questions to learn lots about philosophy? Because I know nothing about formal philosophy, and I'm not sure I want to sign up to get involved into a deep, course in terms of learning about all these different philosophical issues. But to the extent that these concepts help one make better decisions in the policy arena, I think that could be very interesting. So which way do you see it leaning, I guess, between those two?
That's a great question. I mean, I see them as complementary, but my intention is very much to try to give you resources to reason better, as you put it. And so, sometimes we might get lost from a certain perspective in the minutia of a certain philosophical view. But one thing I always try to do when teaching is to bring it back to the perspective of how does this help us think about these questions? How does this help us reason, as you put it? And so on those two extremes, for me, the way I think about this course, and as frankly, especially when we're trying to work through things within an intensive week, for me, it's really about giving you the ideas to think about how you can apply these principles into topics that are interesting to you.
I guess a natural follow-up, Daniel, another Jerry in the chat wants to know about how much reading will be involved before and during the course.
That's a great question. So we have a number of meetings. For each meeting, I'll generally ask you to read what I would think of as 1.5 things. So what I mean by that is one paper of some sort of academic quality, and then generally something else that helps us, focus on a particular case study. It might be a piece of multimedia, it might be a journal article, it might be a newspaper article or something like that. And so that will be distributed beforehand along with a brief reading guide, where for each piece, I'll have a 1-page document, which gives you some hints as to what I think you should focus on in it. So that's all designed to help you prepare for the course and also help you review. You're welcome to read, of course, at whatever pace you would like, whether or not it's, in advance or as we go. One thing that I am hoping to integrate into the course is some use of a discussion board on Canvas to provide you an opportunity to share just very briefly, some of the questions that you're interested in for the next day's material. And so that will be, part of the course where there'll be, I expect you to write, a few sentences, no more than a paragraph, on some questions that are puzzling to you, and I'll give you guidance on what that looks like when it comes to it.
And Ed, I'd like to invite you to come to all of our information sessions because your questions are excellent and things that we should have foreseen ahead of time. But thank you very much for the question you just put in the chat to Daniel. The technology of algorithms, for one, is very complicated. How much technological background in these areas will be necessary for the course, Daniel?
Yeah, that's another great question. So it's not my expectation that you will have significant technological background in algorithms. In fact, one of the things that we're going to talk about is what's called the paradox of transparency, which is about trying to take seriously, how can we, for example, give people the terms and conditions for how their data might be used when we can't expect people to have the technological background to understand what the details are for how their data will actually be used. And so this difficulty of engaging with material that we ourselves are not always experts in is actually something we'll be explicitly discussing in the class. So as the course progresses, depending upon the topic, I design the readings, and I'll provide supplementary material to help provide the technological background that I think is necessary. So for example, on the cryptocurrency topic, I have resources to provide you that I think are very accessible and help making cryptocurrency, things like Bitcoin, accessible to you if it's not something that you're familiar with. On the topic of algorithms, that's a great question. And I'll admit that when I've taught this in the past, I haven't always distributed as much supplementary material to explain some of the more technical questions about algorithms. But I'm definitely actually, your question inspired me to think more about that specific case to complement some of the other things I already do.
And I would just add as well, the MLA students themselves, or the non-credit students that will be participating in this as well, many of them will have their own professional experience and background in these fields. And so they'll be leveraging their experience with, I see somebody, I won't call a name, but I see someone on the call that I know comes from the tech field who's an MLA student. And if they're in the classroom with us in the spring, they'll be able to sort of maybe fill in the gaps and for the embedment of everyone in the classroom. Any other questions?
If I could just not be,
Great.
if I could just not be shy again, this is Ed. So, you know, I'd be curious, you know, then this is not a fair question, but like the participants, like I am a professional in a field of X, right? I mean, do you think, Daniel, that it's designed for a professional in X, or you know, who will my fellow students be to kind of bounce practical ideas off? If you, again, not a fair question about who's going to join, but I think you probably see my point is, like, I'm obviously interested in sort of taking away the sort of philosophic approach to these issues and bringing it back to a very practical environment. And I'm just trying to wonder if it's the right fit for me. and I know again, not fair, but just hoping that you can kind of give me some sort of leverage to make the argument that these 6 days will be well spent, if that's fair.
Yeah, I mean, this is a really hard question. I mean, I'm happy to try to answer it. I guess I would also invite Seth or Tim if you want to say something about, you know, the how these courses are sometimes composed, and then I'll add something.
Sure. So I'll say that the Graham School is intended to be a place that helps learners to really deeply investigate the big ideas that change and challenge the world. We do that through the liberal arts. And so when there are issues like digital ethics, you know, the example that Daniel provided, I think, is an excellent one. It's kind of these timeless ideas, and then how do we take those and apply them to the world today? That is very different than the excellent professional education that takes place at schools like Booth or Harris, where, you know, it's intended for policymakers or business leaders in particular. What I'll share, though, is that by going into this other domain and then looking at the world from a philosophical perspective or from these other, you know, lenses, it gives you a power of discovery that is different and complementary to the professional lens, right? And so my belief is that in this area where we're constructing an entirely new moral code, there is really deep value in looking at philosophy and thinking about what are the right answers here from a societal and even a business perspective, and where do those align. I think to the extent that you have an employer that wants you to be thinking creatively, critically, differently, getting ahead of where, you know, people are going to look at these topics, this could be a really good fit. But I think for an employer that is looking for, what does the code say today? You know, how is it going to change? How will that regulatory environment affect us? There are better places that you should. Chicago and another. This is not fundamentally a professional pursuit, although the education, we believe, can enhance not just the immediate professional experience you have, but your long-term ability to look at these issues deeply and investigatively and creatively. So I hope that answers. And so we believe there's professional value, but we don't start with that when we're building courses. We start with how do you deeply investigate? And there's a belief that as you do so, you gain an ability that enhances your professional as well as your lifelong pursuits. And so, I mean, Daniel, I'll turn it back over to you, but just to give that as a general rule, which I think you're very much following in how you're pursuing this course in particular.
Yeah, thank you, Seth. I mean, maybe this is I feel like this is a philosophical answer in a way, but to your question, but you know, if there's anything that philosophers agree on, it's that a watched pot never boils. And what I mean by that is that if you want to be wise, You can't just try to be wise. That's not going to work. That's not going to work. Yeah, going back to the ancient Greeks, this is how people approach these questions. And I think that, the way that I think about this class and the way that I think about philosophy more generally is that we don't know in advance exactly how we're going to get to the goal of finding actionable principles that will help us live our lives, that will help us make better decisions. But what we have to do is start from the basics, think about fundamentals, and think about how to apply those fundamental principles to ideal and non-ideal situations. And then we'll discover that Aristotle, for example, says that the ability to apply a principle is cleverness, and it's not something that can be laid out in a book. And so what I want to try to do is, provide you with opportunities and resources to think about these questions, and then give you the opportunity to apply your own cleverness in Aristotle's sense to the world by applying these principles and ideas. I'm not going to go back through them again. I've already talked about them at length to the specific cases that are relevant to you.
I think we may have reached, all of the questions. I'll just say, Daniel, I'm really eager to glimpse into your class. It just sounds fascinating and unbelievably timely, even though you're bringing so many timeless ideas to it.
And I should say, by the way, if people do have further questions about the course, you should feel free to reach out to me. My email I've put in the chat, merner@uchicago.edu, and I'm happy to try to help. I think there's one more question, by the way, that I don't know the answer to.
Class sizes to facilitate the conversation that's so central to the experience that Daniel was describing. We capped the class at 20 students. And so with that, I will echo Seth's gratitude. Daniel, this was excellent. Very much enjoyed it. And thank you all for your time and attention this evening. We hope to see you this spring. Kelly and I will be sending a follow-up email tomorrow. So in addition to Daniel's contact information, you'll have our information too to get in touch with to answer any questions. But thank you all very much again. I hope you all have a wonderful evening and rest of the week.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all. Have a
Thanks
good night.
all.
Thanks, Daniel.
Take care.
Thank you.